Hey, if you'd like to earn CEUs for this webinar, join the Safeopedia community at the link in the description below. Now on to the show.
So, thank you very much, Scott. Good morning to you if you are over in the continental United States and Canada. Good afternoon, good evening if you're where I am in Europe, or perhaps even further to the east. I am, as Scott says, I am the Director of Environment, Health, Safety and Sustainability for Mira GTX. I also have the distinct pleasure in 2025 of being the President of the International Institute of Risk and Safety Management, hence my background. Not just the distinct pleasure to be President, but be present during our 50th anniversary. We are an association of about 7,000 members across 90 different countries. And we take a slightly different view on workplace risk in that we take the view that all business risk ultimately becomes a people risk at some point, and that as risk and safety managers, we really need to be able to connect and talk with other people who are managing risks across our businesses. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about neurodiversity. For some people, this may be a new topic. For others, you may have heard the term many times before and just been curious about it. Or indeed, you may have a good understanding of it. So I shall share my slides. I think the first thing that we need to address is the so-called rise of neurodiversity. It's something that I hear quite often. Oh, we're all a bit neurodiverse, aren't we? No, sorry. Where did all this neurodiversity come from? You know, it wasn't there when I was a kid. Yes, it was. Or taking common drugs in pregnancy. No, sorry. Neurodiversity is actually just part of the overall human condition, and that's something I will be addressing as we go through the talk. And normally I kind of say to people, but when you say where did it all come from? Well, it might seem that it's all risen out of nowhere, but really it's actually more about awareness. That little graph there might seem like, oh, yes, Rosie's recognizing there's been this massive uptick, until I actually show you that the graph is the history of left-handedness amongst Americans by year of birth. What we actually see is that there's this steady plateau, and actually about 11.5% of people are left-handed. Did that suddenly appear from somewhere? No, not at all. What happened is, in schools, we stopped persecuting people for being left-handed. Certainly, in my family, we have a greater than average number of left-handed individuals. My father, for instance, is one, and was punished at school for trying to use his left hand to write. It doesn't make him less than anybody else. He just happens to be left-handed. My brother is left-handed. Me, I'm ambidextrous. I annoy the living daylights out of IT by using my mouse left-handed. So, quite simply, neurodiversity has always been there. The next thing that we need to get used to is that neurodiversity doesn't occur as discrete conditions. If I show you this, it's a bit discombobulating to begin with. But what we have down the left-hand side is primary diagnoses, and across the top, secondary diagnoses. What we're seeing there in the blue is the chances of having a secondary diagnosis of something if you have one of the listed conditions. Now, this is where I come up with a new term for you, which is that of being neurospicy. And it's a term that's used a fair bit amongst the neurodiverse community because, well, like any good flavoursome dish, you've got more than one spice in the mix. In my case, I am certainly a little bit dyslexic. Not too severe. I don't have all of the particular traits of dyslexia, just enough to provide a bit of an extra challenge. I am very probably on the autism spectrum. I'm also very probably dyspraxic. When I say very probably, all that means is I've not been diagnosed. But what it does mean is the presentation of each form of neurodiversity is modified by the other. And we will see that in a minute or two when we start taking a look at some of the characteristics of different types of neurodiversity. But how common is it? Well, let's start with the most common, and that's dyslexia. And that's actually about 1 in 10 individuals has some degree of dyslexia. And when I say some degree of dyslexia, this is not a linear scale. There are many different aspects to dyslexia. I myself, the most pronounced part of it is something called cluttering. When there are a lot of words, either on a screen or in a particular paragraph, my mind tends to fall over itself trying to get all of that going together. It's not that I can't understand it, it's that I can't, for some reason, get easily into my mind. So I have to slow down, quite often use my finger to trace things out. I can understand it absolutely fine. Other people have problems visualizing words. Words can seem to move around on the page. There's many different aspects of dyslexia. So you can have different aspects to the dyslexia, and they can be varying in intensity. Really, the issue here is it a problem for the individual? So next we move on to dyspraxia and dyscalculia. Dyspraxia, this is issues around movement and coordination. Now, my nickname in my family growing up was the klutz. I am a bit clumsy. There is no getting around that. Yet, one of my hobbies is making chainmail jewelry and requires really fine motor coordination. That bit works fine with me, but my proprioception, my ability to understand where my body is in space, doesn't work very well. Then we have dyscalculia. Not a problem for me, but this is a problem with numbers. And much like dyslexia, it's not that you can't get the numbers into your mind. It's not that you can't do maths. It's that there are challenges with that. Then we move on into probably one of the most misunderstood conditions, ADHD and ADD. This is about 1 in 20 people. And the assumption is that there's some sort of deficit here, that people are easily distractible, that they can't concentrate, that they're perhaps hyperactive. Well, for some people with this condition, some of those things are true. But the ability to concentrate is actually dependent on the level of interest somebody has in something. And in actual fact, people with ADHD and ADD can hyperfocus for extended periods of time. Far, far longer than people who are considered neuronormative. Also, the hyperactivity can be internal or external. So yes, we have the stereotype of the hyperactive young boy, and it does tend to be boys. But the hyperactivity can be internalized. It can be in the mind. And one person who I'm very close to describes her mind as having 7 hyperactive squirrels on speed, all trying to vie for attention. As you can imagine, that's incredibly distracting. Then we move on to autism, which is topical and in the news at the moment. It's about 1 in 50 people. And it certainly has its challenges. But the stereotypes around maybe lacking emotion or lacking the ability to relate to people, they're not quite what you think. In actual fact, for instance, people with autism spectrum conditions can be highly emotive, can relate to other people. So again, it's not what you think it is. But certainly, I find myself on that spectrum. Then we move into tic conditions. Tourette's would be one of them. So involuntary body movements or involuntary words. And if we bring all of this together, we find that the neurodiverse population is somewhere between 15 and 20% of the global population. Now, if you're quick with numbers like I am, you'll have added that up and gone, that doesn't add up to 15 to 20%. But I showed you a slide already that said that co-occurrence was normal. And we find that up to 4 and 5 people with autism spectrum conditions have DCD, which is the dyspraxia. Up to 1 in 2 people with DCD have ADHD. And I'm really not expecting you to take in the individual conditions here. Really, what I want you to understand at this point is that overlap is the rule, not the exception. What this very much means is if you've met one neurodiverse person, you've met one neurodiverse person. Each neurodiverse individual is just that. And it's understanding their own presentation of neurodiversity. And that's where neurospicy comes in as a really handy term. Because if, like me, you enjoy a good spicy Indian meal, no 2 dishes are the same. And it's the same with neurodiverse individuals. I have quite a few conversations as to how does neurodiversity interact with intelligence? Well, it does and it doesn't. To start with, when it comes to intelligence, there are more different types of intelligence than perhaps we're aware. Let's start with IQ, which actually is linguistic, logical, and spatial intelligence. And this is what has been valued as typical academic intelligence. Now, fortunately, as someone who's probably on the autistic spectrum, I'm quite strong in these areas. So I come as being traditionally intelligent. But we have other people who perhaps are particularly good around movement. I'm not. People who are very musical. I am. People who are really good at interacting with other people. For me, that's contextual. Very good at understanding themselves. Definitely a strength for me. And naturalist, which is really about systems. It was coined originally around understanding the environment and ecosystems, but actually it comes more with systems generally. And when I mapped myself out there, I have an intelligence profile that is different to other people. But where neurodiversity comes in is my ability to perhaps use that intelligence or relate or communicate that intelligence. It certainly can have challenges. So the question really now is someone who is neurodiverse enabled or disabled? There's been a lot of discussion around, oh, that's your superpower. Well, for me, who is mildly neurodiverse, some of what comes with being neurodiverse certainly allows me to do what I do better than others might be able to. But at the same time, it presents challenges for me. And this is really what we need to think about. Now, most of us will have been brought up thinking about conditions along the medical model. Someone can't hear or they can't see. Oh, they need help. They can only do things with somebody else. Never mind, their condition's so serious they can't work. They're dependent on others. Oh, we're looking for a cure for that. And this very much is a deficit-oriented model. And I would posit that actually there's another way of looking at things, and it's the social model of disability. Somebody struggles to walk, fine. So put in lifts, access slopes, make it wheelchair accessible. Someone is very isolated because perhaps they can't hear. Well, maybe we need more sign language interpreters. They can't get to work. Well, maybe it's the transport system that is causing that as a problem. Poor job prospects. Well, maybe it's employers don't understand what the specific talents are of an individual. And certainly this is where some organizations are really starting to steal a march on the rest of us. Certainly we see in tech, IT, finance, auditing, companies involved in those are now actively pursuing and recruiting neurodiverse individuals because they have special skills in those areas. Can't communicate well. Someone who is perhaps non-verbal is penalized for not being able to speak our language. But we're not penalized for not being able to speak their language. And there are many cases of people who are non-verbal, yet they can code, or they can audit, or they can pattern match like nobody else. And it just seems to be that what is a deficit to many of us is actually a lack of distraction to them. So in terms of strengths and abilities, I'm going to go through the top conditions because it's worth understanding a little bit. One of the strengths that I have is attention to detail and very logical thinking. I'm not distracted by emotions or conjecture or hypotheses. I like data. Give me some good solid data, I will be able to dive into that. I can design processes that will work. I can adhere to processes. People with autism often have heightened sensory acuity. Now, at the same time, whilst that's a strength, being able to filter out background noise can definitely be a problem. I am naturally very diligent with repetitive tasks, but can be sometimes a little difficult to drag me away from something I'm really interested in. And that's where executive functioning comes in. That ability to prioritize, plan, see the wood from the trees. Challenges may include social skills, but Rosie, you present very well. Certainly I've been told so in the past. And that's true. And I speak very well one-to-one, maybe in a group of 2 or 3 people. As soon as I get in a large room of people and I'm asked to make small talk, I shut down. And non-verbal communication. I don't always know when I'm boring you. I'm sorry. If I'm finding something interesting, I quite often assume that you also find it interesting. I'm not so good at change. Well, that's not true. I'm not good at change that's imposed on me. I'm actually very good at managing change. And sensory acuity in some contexts. That filtering when there's a lot of background noise, really, really difficult. And at one point I was given hearing aids. They didn't help. They thought I was deaf because I couldn't filter. I'm not deaf, I'm just overstimulated. Now, dyscalculia, people who struggle with numbers. It might be counterintuitive, but they're actually highly entrepreneurial. Lateral thinking, they can come up with real sparks of insight where you think, where on earth did that come from? They are creative and visual thinkers. They can problem solve, they can multitask, they're good communicators, they're energetic, enthusiastic. If that sounds like somebody you want in your marketing department, you're probably right. Just make sure you've got someone else in there to manage the budgets. They do have challenges, estimating distance, understanding of mathematical formula, that kind of goes with then time management. Again, they can get wrapped up very much in something that they're interested in. And that's where difficulty with prioritization sometimes comes in. But some of those skills that they've got are so valuable. Dyslexia. One of the top things that comes with that is actually a heightened ability to communicate and socialize. Now, I mentioned that I'm slightly dyslexic. For me, that modifies my autism. Now, lateral creative thinking. Yet the autism likes linear logical thinking. Actually, it means I can do a bit of both. Dyslexics are highly entrepreneurial. Richard Branson would be a really good example here. Executive functioning skills, reasonable, but visual thinking. Dyslexics are really, really good visual thinkers. But they might need more time to read documents, or perhaps they need a productivity aid, something that can read a document to them. Report writing, probably not a strength. Executive functioning skills, definitely a challenge. Spelling and grammar, let's not. ADHD, lateral thinking, creative thinking, but easily distracted. Difficulty doing something that's repetitive if they're not interested. Definitely got time blindness. You tell an ADHD person that they need to be ready in 15 minutes, that's great, there's no crisis, they're not going to move. They've got to be out the door in 30 seconds, now they've got the energy to do something about it. So ADHD people, I'm afraid, will often be late, but they will bring you really huge benefits. Dyspraxia, difficulties with movement, are creative, lateral thinkers with good social and communication skills. So again, that's me, and that modifies my autism. But spatial awareness, yeah. it's more than once I've landed up in the emergency room having to have my finger stitched back together because I just sharpened a kitchen knife and cut myself. Not intentionally. Intricate practical tasks, yes, depending on the presentation of dyspraxia. And Tourette's, actually, they're superb at prioritizing. They're really innovative and creative as well. Someone with Tourette's, potentially a really good project manager. But they don't rub along well with other neurotypes. Low inhibitory control, some communication challenges. They do need to move impulsively as well. So, it's a balance. So that's the strengths and the challenges of different neurotypes. We do also find that 70% of neurodiverse individuals suffer from poor mental health. And for the undiagnosed, that also comes with a much higher risk of suicide. The problem here is coexisting with neuronormatives and trying to mask. And that puts a huge extra cognitive load on people who are neurodiverse. And this is brilliantly brought to life by Christine Miserando. She's not neurodiverse, she has lupus, but she's dealing with a chronic condition. She was trying to explain to a friend of hers what it's like. And she said they were in a restaurant and the cutlery tray was nearby, and she just grabbed a handful of spoons and says, this is kind of the amount of energy I have in the morning. But getting up and showering is a spoon. Getting to work is a spoon. Doing work, 4 spoons. And what she was trying to show is that you have a limited amount of energy. And when actually dealing with masking, which is what neurodiverse people do, when trying to appear normal, we're using some of our spoons for that. A good example of that you might be able to relate to there is if you're a night owl, and about 40% of the population are, you're operating in a world that was designed by morning larks. So getting up at 6 a.m. is a real challenge every single day and saps your energy. So in terms of understanding neurodiversity, the first thing we need to do is think that the brain works more like an ecosystem than a machine. Forget the computer analogy. Think more pot plant. If you've got a pot plant that's wilting in one corner of the room, you're going to water it, you're going to feed it, you're maybe going to move it somewhere that's got more light. So it is with neurodiversity. Some niches aren't for us. We need to find a niche that works better. As I showed you with intelligence, human beings and human brains exist along continuums of competence. So we're good at some things, not at others. And that's just who we are. Doesn't mean we're good, doesn't mean we're bad, doesn't mean we're intelligent or not. But human competence is defined by the culture to which you belong. If you grew up in an agrarian society, having the boundless energy that you might get from, say, the hyperactivity side of ADHD might be valued. Having the pattern recognition that comes from autism and knowing that that always works better if we plant that crop after that crop, that would be valued. Whether you're disabled or gifted largely depends on when and where you were born. We have fabulous actors who aren't great at reading. It's different skills, and learning to value different skills for different types of tasks is about how we get the best out of the neurodiverse. And success in life for all of us is based on adapting your brain to the needs of your surrounding environment. We have to adapt somewhat. But we can also modify our environment to fit the needs of our unique brains. So I have a quiet private office with lower lighting. I also have the ability to use noise-cancelling headphones. I have control over my lighting. I have a desk lamp just here that I've just moved because the lights in the office have just gone off on the environmental controls. And in terms of myself, my niche construction definitely includes career and lifestyle choices. I am in a scientific-based role that suits me very well. I have access to assistive technologies where I need them. And that allows me to use my unique brain absolutely to the best of its abilities. But what's interesting is when you start taking off some of the cognitive load and allow people to unmask and work in a way that suits them, it actually creates more mental capacity for them to actually adapt to the world around them. And we see this in the development of children, that where they are given the opportunity to be more themselves, they then have the ability to learn some of the skills that they need to exist in a neuronormative environment. So we do see already people finding their niche. ADHD in marketing, 37%. We see a higher proportion of dyslexic in construction, logistics, architecture, engineering, and healthcare. Interesting. It's that enhanced communication skills, nurses communicating with patients. No surprise that in the UK, the Royal College of Arts, 29% of their students are dyslexic. Autism, massively overrepresented in tech and biotech where I work. It's not 1 in 50 of the population. I reckon it's probably more like 25%. And the problem here is that the barriers to people achieving their very best come from the workplace, the work culture, and the work design. But guess what? We're in control of those, which means we can adapt. So what is it that we need to do to adapt? Well, I've got a cheat sheet for you. Let's start with designing new workplaces with neurodiversity in mind, providing different spaces for different work types. We don't all like a noisy open plan office. Some of us need focused spaces. And that's not just the neurodiverse, that's the introverts amongst us. Some of us like brightly lit spaces, some like low light, some like warm places, cold places. We need to create workplaces that aren't being designed for the average, because if you have an average environment, it's one size fits none. We need to stop thinking about things like dictation software, screen readers, screen tinting as adaptions. They're not. They were never designed as adaptions. Dictation software was designed for the medical profession as a productivity tool. And actually, if we start providing some of these to our workforce, not on the basis of diagnosis, but on the basis of choice, that's how I choose to work, guess what? You'll unlock productivity. If we allow people within teams to specialize, we make sure that instructions are written down and clear. Well, there's no argument about what needs to be done, and that actually helps everybody. We need to make sure that line managers have an awareness of differences amongst us. Bear in mind, this is probably 1 in 5 of your co-workers. So our line management style can't be one size fits all. It needs to be open, supportive, and person-centered to get the best out of people. We need to recognize that anybody in any walk of life can suffer with lower mental health. So we need to have things in place to support them. And we need to have a culture that is trained in neurodiversity that naturally has a low level of interruptions, because guess what? That helps everybody. You need to speak to somebody, pop them a Teams message, pop them an email, rather than tap them on the shoulders when they might be in the middle of a hyperfocus session that they could take hours to regain. But ultimately, we need to be tolerant of each other, tolerant of differences in routines. You might say, that's all very well, Rosie, but why should we go to all this effort? Well, according to Forbes magazine and studies done at Harvard, teams that manage to do this, that manage to accommodate neurodiversity in their midst, perform 30% more than those that do not. And that right there is a competitive advantage. So neurodiversity, it's not new, it's always been there. We are all slightly different. Yes, in our own ways, we might be slightly odd and present a challenge. But actually, if we all rub along together, there are some real skills and opportunities that including neurodiverse people, in fact, selecting for neurodiversity, can offer organizations. So at that point, I'll just open up the floor and say, are there any questions?